Well, already, gang, welcome back to Sports Talk with Mike and Steve. I'm just kidding.
Today's video is brought to us by Barrel Block. Barrel Block is an excellent dry fire training aid that we've used for years and recommend. It provides an easy to see indicator that your firearm is empty and safe for dry practice. It comes in all service calibers and can be installed and removed in seconds without disassembling your gun. It's an inexpensive, easy way to give more margin for safety, so go pick one up today.
Listen, we've heard the complaints. We understand. Enough with the sports. We're going to keep it to a minimum. But for this one last time, at least, well, maybe not the last time, Steven wants to address his Phillies, who looked so dominant.
I don't want to.
Well,
I don't want to address anything. I don't. That was awful. But yeah, exactly like I said. It's terrible when you lose like that and collapse like that. It's exactly as awful as I thought it was going to be. So we can never talk about Philly sports again if you want. It's too painful anyway.
Until your Eagles are about to go to the Super Bowl, then we're going to hear it again in this space. This is not sports talk, folks. This is the Gutowski Files, and it is, as always, starring Steven Gutowski. I don't know if I mentioned it recently, but Steven is the founder of TheReload.com. He is the editor-in-chief. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
And the host of the Weekly Reload podcast. He's a man of many parts. He wears a lot of hats, and we appreciate him coming on the show that we named after him. Anyway, this week we are talking about an article over at TheReload.com by our Steven Gutowski, and the headline is "Gun Group Says Ruling Against California Gun Show Ban Prevents Culture Side." So, Steven, why don't you start by telling us what was California attempting to do with this sort of ban of gun shows or gun events on public property, and then what happened in court?
Yeah, well, essentially, California, there's a number of these large public grounds where they have fairs and things like that. And one of the things that's common are for them to host gun shows.
Mm-hmm.
They sign contracts with gun show hosting companies, and they have big gun shows in Orange County and elsewhere in the state. And essentially, state lawmakers didn't like that. Obviously, California is very broadly controlled by the Democratic Party and tends to be on the stricter, if not strictest in the nation side of things when it comes to gun laws. So recently they passed a pair of laws that made it so that public grounds can't host gun shows, and that officials responsible for administrating those public grounds can't sign contracts with gun show companies, essentially. Of course, California, it's a bit odd too, because California also, they have a 10-day waiting period when you go to buy a gun. So gun shows in California are already quite a bit different from a lot of other states where they don't have that sort of waiting period. Because really all you do at a gun show, it's almost like buying a gun online, right? Where you can buy the gun from a dealer online, but then it has to be shipped to your local gun dealer where you actually go in and fill out the background check and pay a transfer fee and things like that. That's kind of how gun shows work in California, except it's face to face. You go in and there are guns, you can look at them and talk all the stuff you would do at a gun show elsewhere, but you can't walk out with a gun that day, right? Okay. You have to, it's sort of more of you're more setting up an arrangement where you're going to buy the gun. I think you can pay for it, but you can't pick it up until 10 days later under California law. So anyway, they already has a number of restrictions that you don't get necessarily elsewhere. You can't do, obviously the private sales are also have to be run through dealers because they have a universal background checks law in California. So that aspect of gun shows is different there as well. But this law was focused on just kind of trying to ensure that these events don't happen on public property at all anymore. And so that was what the judge ruled against. He found that sort of regulation, it violates not just the Second Amendment, but actually also the First Amendment in this case.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the article right now over at TheReload.com. It says on Monday, U.S. District Court Judge John W. Holcomb issued a preliminary injunction stopping California from enforcing its ban. So I don't, one thing I'm not sure about is, was the ban in effect? So for example, so up until this judge's ruling, was it technically illegal for people to schedule these gun shows on public property?
Yeah, and uh, the judge also in this case denied a request for a stay from the California government, which means that this ruling will go into effect immediately. Of course, we're waiting for confirmation that California is going to appeal this ruling. They most likely will, and they'll probably request a stay from the appeals court, which has traditionally granted stays of that nature. So, whether or not any gun shows will actually happen on public property as this fight continues on in the courts, I think is still a pretty open question, because obviously it also takes several months to get these things organized in most cases. And so even though you have this ruling, it's not as though, the public grounds nearby people in California are going to start hosting gun shows tomorrow. But it is a significant legal victory.